What historical fact makes you cry? A story from my great-grandfather who fought in World War I. Soldiers would cease fire to pick up their men's bodies and would have a smoke together. Go back to their trenches and start firing again. Neither side of frontline soldiers actually wanted to be there. Just drafted for war. It doesn't exactly make me cry. But Albert Göring, the staunchly anti-Nazi brother of Hermann Göring, spent the Second World War helping Jews and dissidents to escape. He was caught several times, but was let off the hook due to his brother's influence within the Reich. After the war, he was shunned for his last name and his accomplishments forgotten. The Arpay of Nanking in 1937. Looking up photos of what the Japanese did there left me silent for a while. They Arpayed and murdered women. Bayoneted babies. You can look up a photo of it. Used the wounded as rifle and bayonet practice. Forced mothers on their sons and fathers on their daughters. Made a contest out of beheading civilians. There is a Japanese newspaper article you can look up about it. It's disgusting. And the worst part about it is that the Japanese government denies most of these acts, along with a lot of other war crimes that they committed afterwards. It always shakes me to my core to know that human beings are capable of doing such horrible things to one another. And smile while doing it. After the Pearl Harbor attack, at least some men were alive in a pocket of air inside one of the capsized ships. Navy personnel could hear them banging on the hull and trying to signal for help. But there was no way to get at them safely. The water was full of fuel and oil. So blowtorches weren't a workable idea. And there was no way for divers to get into the ship because the damage had rendered the whole thing a death trap of twisted steel. There wasn't even any way to communicate with the trapped men. So the guards at Pearl Harbor had to listen to those calls for help getting weaker and weaker, while inside everyone slowly suffocated. When they hauled the ship up for scrap later, there were 16 notches scratched onto the wall of that compartment. Which means at least one casualty of Pearl Harbor lived until the 23rd of December, 1941. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. The doors to the exit and the stairwells were locked. So you either had to jump out the window or be burned alive. One of the girls in the Donner Party was fed her dead mother and told afterwards. They had an agreement to not feed people their family members. But they had broken off from the camp in an attempt to find rescue. She would randomly burst into tears about it at school years later. The whole story of the Donner Party is so horrible and sad, and it bothers me that it's just used for cannibal jokes. It gets worse. They didn't have to starve. Local Indians tried to approach the party to trade with them and were driven off by gunfire because the white settlers were afraid of them. Teddy Roosevelt's mother Mitty and his wife Alice, who had just given birth days before, both died in the same house on the same day, hours apart from each other. In his diary entry that day, he drew a large black X and scribbled, "The light has gone out of my life." That's some heavy right there, man. I learned about this in a Dan Carlin podcast. During the German-Soviet War, there was a Red Army soldier who sang each night with a hauntingly beautiful voice. His comrades would give him their tea rations and scarves to protect his larynx. One night, he couldn't sing because he had gotten sick. A German soldier crawled across no man's land and tossed something into the Soviet trench. The Soviet soldiers thought it was a grenade. However, it was a package containing a letter asking if the singer was okay and if he needed medicine. A truly heartwarming moment in an otherwise horrific front. Edit. Thanks for the awards and upvotes. Seriously, though, if you are even remotely interested in history, you can't go wrong with hardcore history. I never knew that I wanted to listen to a man talk about a topic for 16 hours. Virginia Woolf's suicide and the note she left behind makes me weep like a baby. Just the way she expresses sentiments of happiness and love to her husband. But also her guilt and struggle with mental illness, it just kills me. Most if not all the astronauts aboard the Challenger survived the explosion. It was the crash into the water that would have killed them. Irish unmarried moms were sometimes required to live in institutions. raising their own babies until they were adopted. Imagine knowing how cute your kid was. Taking care of it. Knowing you couldn't keep it. When Alexander Hamilton's eldest son died, his second child Angelica Hamilton had a mental breakdown and she never recovered. Sometimes, her family would walk into a room with only her in it, and she would be speaking to her dead brother. The oldest recorded name for a cat was from ancient Egypt. The cat's name was Nejum, which means sweetie. World War I mercy dogs. They would go out into no man's land and find wounded soldiers. They would bring medical supplies for the soldiers to patch themselves up. Or if the soldier was too mortally wounded, stay and comfort them in their final moments. The end of a Sappho poem. Beyond all hope. I prayed those timeless days we spent might be made twice as long. I prayed one word. I want. Someone. I tell you. Will remember us. Even in another time. That quote always makes me tear up. The assassination of Aurelian. So pointless. He could have achieved so much. There's no more wolves in Ireland. They are coming back to Germany. And there are already groups which want to kill them all again. And they are spreading panic. There was a news story where a woman reported to be attacked by a wolf wearing a collar. It was a lost dog looking for help, which sniffed and licked her hand. There were approximately 300 infants and children that were murdered in Jonestown, being forcibly fed or injected with cyanide. I feel so much pain for all the victims, but the kids in particular make me ache with despair. It used to be common for a WAPed woman to be allowed to marry her rapist so as to not get in trouble for being WAPed. During World War II, the Japanese army had comfort stations which served as prisons for women who were taken against their will. They would routinely form lines to take turn in upping and torturing the women trapped in these prison cells. This is just one of Japan's horrid actions during the war. Unit 731 and the Nanjing Massacre are other examples. Henry Gunter was an American soldier killed during World War I at 10:59 am on the 11th of November, 1918. 1 minute before the armistice took effect at 11:00 am. Gunter charged a German roadblock outfitted with machine guns. German soldiers tried waving him off, knowing the war would come to an end in mere moments. Apparently he got too close, fired a couple rounds, and was promptly shot and killed instantly. Through genealogy, I found an old newspaper reporting an accident that happened. My 4 ex-great-grandmother and grandfather were crossing the river into Maine from Canada when their wagon tipped. He and 5 children survived. My 4 ex-great-grandmother and month-old baby did not. That tugged at my heart. I cannot imagine the devastation he and his children felt as they were moving. There was also a lot of stillborns and a lot of children who never saw past the age of 10. It's quite a sad journey at times. The Sand Creek Massacre is particularly bad. They had so much faith in the peace treaties that had been signed. The signs of good faith from American settlers. Only to be massacred. The leader of the camp, Black Kettle, desperately holding up the American flag he'd been given with a white flag underneath it, encouraging his people to gather around it, thinking that the settlers would realize they were allies and stop the killings, only to be shot down. The descriptions of the massacre are brutal: children tortured and slaughtered, pregnant women with their children torn out of their stomachs, genitals torn from corpses and taken for trophies. It really made me realize you can never underestimate the cruelty of mankind. Especially considering most of the murdered in this massacre were defenseless women, children, and elderly. Dangerfield Newby, one of the free black men who died in the raid on Harper's Ferry, had a letter from his enslaved wife on his person. He had been working to buy her and his children, but her owner kept raising the price. Almost a quarter of Europe's military-age males died in World War I. The total number of deaths includes from 9 to 11 million military personnel. The civilian death toll was about 6 to 13 million. The casualties in individual battles were insane. For example, 306 000 people died at the Battle of Verdun over the course of 1916. At the Battle of the Somme, almost 1 million were wounded or killed. The Radium Girls trying to make an honest living. The killing fields and the tree. The Red Khmer used to kill infants and small children by smashing them against it. Anna Mae Aquash, Native woman who was involved with the American Indian Movement, AIM, was shot in the back of the head execution style. The investigation around her murder was shady and involved the FBI cutting off her hands with the premise that her corpse needed to be fingerprinted. I first learned about her in the first pages of Lakota Woman, a memoir by Mary Bravebird, who was one of her closest friends and who wrote about the murder and how the FBI cut off her hands. I have not been able to stop thinking about Anna's dismembered hands since I read it. Mary also wrote about the involuntary sterilization of Native women in her community, which was widespread through at least the 1970s. The disembodiment and disrespect of Native women haunts me and will haunt me for the rest of my life, especially as a woman and a Native descendant. The treatment of children, in particular, by Joseph Mengele at the concentration camps during World War II. I'm brutal. And now that I have kids of my own, it tears me up anytime I hear about it. Genocide of Srebrenica in 1995. The entire world, apart from poor powerless UN soldiers, looked away as thousands of civilians were executed. In general, I can't believe how much evil and cruelty took place in former Yugoslavia not that long ago. Breakup of the Kalmar Union. Basically, this kick-ass Danish queen united Denmark, Norway, Sweden and Finland, only for her to it all up. Pictures of a box of wedding rings taken from the corpses of Jewish people in concentration camps. It just makes me so sad that the only remembrance of their spouse, who could be dead for all they know, is stolen from them and they are unceremoniously buried without their ring. Then the rings are carelessly stored in a wooden box to be melted down. That one of the world's most talented mathematicians died around the age of 40 because he was gay and lived in a country that had made it illegal to be. Alan Turing. He was one of the people we can thank for having computers today and that World War II didn't last longer. Edit. I wrote that he died. But really, he was ordered by court to be chemically castrated for being gay. It's probable that he committed suicide because he wasn't able to work under the influence of his medication. It's also of note that he received a post-mortem pardon from the Queen of England in 2012. Imagine it being illegal to be gay. Quite unthinkable in modern times. Arpay of Nanking. Anne Frank's death at the age of 15. Hiding from Nazis. Had contracted typhus. Couldn't recover from it and left her diary for us. Her last words from her diary. As I've told you many times, I'm split in two. One side contains my exuberant cheerfulness, my flippancy, my joy in life and, above all, my ability to appreciate the lighter side of things. By that I mean not finding anything wrong with flirtations, a kiss, an embrace, an off-color joke. This side of me is usually lying in wait to ambush the other one, which is much purer, deeper and finer. I like how the Anne Frank Foundation defended Justin Bieber. When he visited, he signed something that said he hoped she would have been a fan. And people said it was self-serving and presumptuous and undignified. The foundation came out and said that Justin understood better than a lot of people that she was a teenage girl. She wasn't setting out to be a Madonna-type matter of purity and perfection. And they thought she would be pleased that the world's biggest pop star came to find out about her life. The fact that Anne Frank died just 2 weeks before the camps were liberated. Every time I read her diary, other books about it, I get this weird sense of hope for her, even though I know it's crazy, because of the timing. The story of Alex, 1977 to 2007. An African grey parrot who learned to speak, recognize objects and play with his owner. It was one of the smartest parrots ever reported. He loved his owner and his owner adored him as well. In the end, he suffered arteriosclerosis. So his owner went to see him one last time. To which Alex told his owner, "You are good. I love you." She replied, "I love you too." He said, "I'll see you tomorrow," and she replied, "Yes. I'll see you tomorrow." That even babies weren't spared during the Nanking Massacre. Christmas Day, 1914. German and British soldiers got up from their trenches and called a 48-hour truce to just chill and even play soccer. This makes me cry because it shows that the soldiers of both sides really found it pointless to fight other people just cause their country said so. This is probably the strongest story of unity I've heard about in history class. Tibetan monks who spend their lives in solitude are often murdered as their deep sense of self is too unwavering for their local government. Modern history makes me sad. It's gotta be Franz Ferdinand's last words. Considering he was so sympathetic to the Serbian cause only to be killed by a Serbian nationalist himself. And was begging his wife to stay alive for their children as she was pregnant. And trying to assure the people around him that he was fine as he slowly faded into death. And it ended up starting an event which then decided the whole course of the 20th century. Edit. I made this post a little late, so I won't be replying to any more comments because I have to sleep. So don't expect any more replies or answers from me. Sorry if you wanted some, but every man's gotta sleep. Edit 2. Yes, I know that this wasn't the event that technically started the war. I know it was going to happen anyways. I just said that it started World War I because it's usually known as the event that started World War I. Sorry about that, but I'm just trying to help those that don't know as much about this event as others. I find acts of heroic sacrifice makes me much more emotional than acts of evil and suffering. The latter is so common in the headlines that I've become desensitized to them. Fall of Constantinople. Had the privilege of watching Schindler's List for the first time yesterday. That got me choked up. As I imagine it did for a lot of other people as well. Seeing him change from an opportunistic warmonger to a good man. And realizing that over 1,000 people's lives were saved as a result of his work is so inspiring. The Trail of Tears. This is what I was going to say. Andrew Jackson ignored a Supreme Court ruling to respect the sovereignty of native nations in the U.S. and marched tens of thousands of Native Americans out of their ancestral homelands in the southeastern U.S., killing thousands. Pretty much all of Unit 731. How anyone could do that to fellow human beings is beyond me. Even worse is that the research done there ended up benefiting science. Extinction of the dinosaurs. The Holocaust. The Ustaše, which was a fascist organization in Croatia allied with the Nazis, set up a concentration camp for children during World War II. The Ustaše committed such incredible acts of depravity and slaughter that many were killed extrajudicially by Yugoslav partisans after the war. Many still view these killings as karmic justice, and their views aren't entirely without merit. On Flanders Fields. JFK's sister Rosemary Kennedy had seizures and mood swings when she was young. Her father Joseph Kennedy decided to lobotomize her in 1941 at 23 years old. She was left severely disabled and unable to speak after the procedure for the rest of her life till she died in 2005 at 86 years old. You can read her diaries she wrote before the lobotomy in the 1930s, where she talks about her full life of going to operas and other social gatherings, meeting the Pope and visiting the White House. She also wrote about her aspirations in social welfare work and performing on stage. It always makes me so sad when I think about her and her life that was stolen from her because of her parents trying to avoid embarrassment. George Washington died before dinosaurs were discovered, so he never knew about the magical creatures that are giant spicy lizards. It's pretty recent history. But Rob Hall's death on Everest. Hall was a guide for one of several expeditions that got trapped in a massive snowstorm in 1996. He became trapped after refusing to leave one of the clients he was guiding, who was too weak from hypoxia to make it down in the worsening weather. The client died, but Hall survived a full night and day near the summit of Everest. He was in radio contact with base camp the whole time. When they realized there was no way they were going to get him down, his friends at base camp held the radio up to a satellite phone so that Hall could say goodbye to his pregnant wife. Just the idea of dying so far away and just having that one little thread of connection to the world. Vladimir Komarov, the man who fell from space. He was a part of some Soviet space show and the shuttles were poorly built and he knew how bad they were. I mean, he knew he was gonna die and he did it all just so save his own friend Yuri Gagarin. Tiananmen Square is gut-wrenching when you read into it. Gunning down tens of thousands and then running over them with tanks so they could be pressure washed into the drains. Then a largely successful attempt by China to erase it from history in much of the world. Most people have no idea anything to do with the Belgian Congo Free State. The guy who killed Hitler never got a statue. The fact so many people on the Titanic died purely because they were poor, unable to escape the lower decks. And those who did couldn't get onto the half-empty lifeboats because the rich saved themselves first. Christianization of many places destroyed rich oral mythologies before they could be written down in their own context. Not cry, but feel very bad. Don't need many words for this one. Just names. Alan Turing and Rosalind Franklin. Can't imagine how defeated they must have felt. Everything about Tiananmen Square. Our synod denies it ever happened and bans anyone who mentions it and says your white privilege will not be tolerated here. It's awful. Internment camps of the Japanese in both the US and Canada. Growing up, I hated the fact we did this to innocent people based on race. And I thought it was uniquely American until I visited Canada for my summer abroad honors program, where I got to hear the story of a man who not only lived in 3 internment camps in Canada, but they even shipped him to Okinawa twice. Even though he was born in Canada and didn't even speak Japanese. I cried several times just listening to his story. Minnie Vautrin saved so many lives. But at the end of the war, she couldn't live with what she has been through and took her own life. The woman literally saved over 10,000 people. Didn't sleep for weeks as she fought the Japanese army. She was just a school teacher. Had I 10 perfect lives, I would give them all to China. Minnie Vautrin. The Trail of Tears. Screw Andrew Jackson. Nuff said. Chernobyl man. Biggest up in history. If Chernobyl is the biggest up according to your history books, boy, I have news for you. The Khmer Rouge and their savaging existence. They had a tree that served a purpose, that is dying. Just edit. Just remembered the atrocities that the Japanese smite amongst the Chinese population during World War II. There was a documentary of a dude recollecting first-hand description of when the Japanese took over and killed his mother and brother in front of him. Humans. The fate of the Knights Templar. They were persecuted and destroyed just so the French king didn't have to pay his debts to them, after they'd given up the Crusades and became a bank and loan. I took my nephew, when he was 11 or 12, on a bike ride in the town cemetery. It is a nice, quiet, safe place to ride bikes. We stopped to look at some of the old graves in the older part, late 1800s. Close bracket. He asked me why there were so many children buried there. He was looking at a family plot where 4 or 5 boys had been buried. Not one being over the age of 5. All brothers. I find it very sad that people want to return to that. There was a World War II dude who played the trumpet. One day he was told to stop cause there was a sniper hiding in the mountains who'd totally him up if he heard the sound. Guy did it anyway, but he instead played the popular love song 18 years old Germans listened to. Wasn't shot. Next day sniper is captured and he asked who played the song. The guy says I did and you didn't shoot me? Kid was a scared 18 years old. Said he wasn't gonna shoot the man who played the song, him and his GF. The girl he missed. Listened to back at home. It was their song as a couple. He didn't know what he was fighting for. He wasn't evil. It's not as terrible as every story under this post, so I'm sorry if it comes as insensitive. But my great grandfather was in the resistance during the Second World War, and on the 9th of May 1945, the day after the war ended, he died in a car chase while fleeing from some belligerent Germans. We commemorate his sacrifice every year on the spot where him and his friend crashed in the deep French country. A high school has been named after him. I get really emotional every time. I'm sorry if my English isn't perfect. Stalin had more people killed than Hitler. And a lot of them were his own. He's not regarded and remembered as bad as Hitler by most. Because he was allied with, well, the Allies. The French had a chance to stop Blitzkrieg. The Luftwaffe in early 1940 had no chance to stand up to the French Air Force. Nor were they even that involved in Blitzkrieg. The French had the ability of just bombing and destroying the German forces in their tracks. And the war would be over. Why didn't they do that then? Incompetence. When French recon units first reported the German forces to command, the head marshal of the French army at the time dismissed the report and didn't believe it. So as such, the French were screwed the moment he came to that conclusion. Had the marshal believed the recon report, and the Germans had been bombed, the war would have just ended right then and there. Especially because the Germans threw almost everything they had at France. As a history student, I should probably have an answer. But honestly, so many terrible things have happened. You just can't choose one.